Okay. For individuals who grew up in Newark, New Jersey in the 1990s and early 2000s, exposure to social organizations was unavoidable. Churches, gangs, employers, etc., represent some of the options for individuals looking to join a group. Consider each group as a factory for personal development. New members enter these organizations one way and become someone new as a function of membership. Individuals' matriculation through these organizations can be depicted as a conveyor belt. If one were to look at the output of these conveyor belts, one could draw conclusions about the nature of the respective factories, judge a tree by the fruit it bears. In that sense, affiliation with these organizations can be judged based on the resultant condition of the affiliates. For example, suppose there are 10 Christians and 10 Muslims living in North New Jersey. One can look at the group averages to ascertain the nature of Christianhood and Muslimhood in that geographic region. So, if 8 out of the 10 Christians were diagnosed with prolonged grief disorder following the loss of a spouse, one can make inferences about how individuals' membership might influence their internal makeup and grief process. Suppose 3 out of the 10 Muslims were diagnosed with prolonged grief disorder following loss of a spouse. One could also make similar inferences about Muslimhood. Furthermore, one can compare the respective yields of Christianhood and Muslimhood and determine which is better than the other based on some metric. In this case, the metric would be the presence of prolonged grief disorder, but it could also be measured by an infinite amount of output variables: income, housing status, marital satisfaction, quality of life, etc. This information will be most useful for neutral people who are considering which group to join. In addition to group membership, there may be other aspects of the individual's internal world that can be assessed, such as their beliefs. Using the same metaphor as above, beliefs too can be analyzed as factories. Suppose there are 10 people believing God exists and 10 people believing God does not exist. What becomes of the believers over time? What value does that belief have on the individual? Is it viral and malignant, leading individuals to more self defeating affect, behavior, and cognitions? Or is it inspirational and palliative, leading individuals to more self affirming affect, behavior, and cognitions? Computer viruses are simply sets of coding that lead to malfunctions in the system. Likewise, biological viruses are sets of RNA that lead to malfunctions in the biological system. Likewise, maladaptive cognitive schemas, beliefs are sets of information that lead to malfunctions in the psychological system. Understanding the body as a polymorphic and fully integrated entity, the psychological malfunctions impact neural, biopsychosocial, economic, and other functions in other systems. In other systems. Understanding the body as a fully integrated entity, the psychological malfunctions impact neural, biopsychosocial, economic, and other systems. The implications of beliefs are observable across the 8 dimensions of wellness in the individual's quality of life. Thus, God exists can be compared with God does not exist based on the quality of life of the believers, people who operate with this coding. Much like the case of religious organizations, information about the impact of these beliefs on believers can be informative for people who are uncertain what to believe. Psychological advantageousness, PA. The current research presents a new metric for analyzing these factories following the aforementioned metaphor. Current research presents a new metric. Psychological advantageousness. Psychological advantageousness refers to the value of an individual's mental and emotional intrapsychic infrastructure or its components. Beliefs, affects, cognitions, dispositions, organizational affiliations, modus operandi, or schemas, etc., determined by the resultant impact on the individual's quality of life. Moving forward, the term belief will be used representatively for the various components of the MEII. is to be understood as interchangeable. Moving forward, the term belief should be understood as interchangeable with other components of the MEII. For any given belief, what is the quality of life of the believers? Psychological advantageousness is best illustrated using a spectrum ranging from low to high, suggesting that every soul's MEII and its individual components confer differential impacts on quality of life. Psychological advantageousness is distinct from psychological advantage because the former identifies how much of the latter is present. Do beliefs have power? Do beliefs have power? Let us begin first. Do beliefs have power? Yes. According to Halligan and Mansell, 2006, beliefs have the power to impact illness, treatment, and recovery. This power is named as psychosocial influence. Consider the example of a child who is taught to wash their hands after using the restroom compared to the child who is not. The child who adopts the belief may develop a protective conviction or automated discipline to impulsively wash his hands after using the restroom. Belief sparks, drives, and sustains behavior. Finnis et al. 2010 described the utility of placebo effects in research in clinical settings and defined them as genuine psychobiological events. Placebo is referred to false treatments such as the sugar pill that the patient perceives to be beneficial yet has no inert medicinal substance. Placebo effects refer to the fact that such false treatments yield outcomes in the individual believing the treatment. Polo et al. 2001 reported a group of post-operation patients receiving intravenous saline as a placebo who were told it was a potent painkiller requested 33% less use of the analgesic treatment. Interventions such as cognitive behavioral therapy emphasize the cognitive triangle, a model suggesting thoughts influence behavior mediated by affect. Additionally, many motivational speakers such as Dr. Eric Thomas, Les Brown, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, and Inky Johnson, to name a few, have emphasized the role of thinking in producing better life outcomes. Their recommendations overlap with the CBT literature in that they challenge individuals' thought patterns and self-belief, attesting to the power belief has on actions and results. Self-help books such as a Man Thinketh, The Power of Positive Thinking, A Practical Guide to Mastering the Problems of Everyday Living, and The Secret further speak to the power of beliefs on results. Even the layman's nomenclature includes a notion of psyching yourself out that points to the role that thoughts and beliefs can have in undermining one's performance. If thoughts and beliefs can be used in that way, what about psyching yourself in? The health belief model describes the impact of beliefs on health outcomes. According to Glanz, people engage in health behaviors based on their perception of their individual risk, the costs and benefits, the availability of resources, and perceived barriers that pale in comparison to perceived benefits. According to Glanz, among individuals who believed that they were more susceptible to tuberculosis and that there were benefits from early detection, 82% had at least one voluntary chest x-ray. In contrast, only 21% of those who perceived lower personal susceptibility and benefits obtained x-rays. Put simply, beliefs impact actions, affect, and outcomes. Beliefs are powerful. How can that power be wielded? How can one determine the differential power of individual beliefs, belief clusters, thoughts, emotions, and affective cognitive patterns? The neurobiological, immunological, and psychosocial independence of the allostatic lobe model demonstrate the power of beliefs and other components of the MEII because the stress response begins with perceived stress, which involves cognitive appraisal and beliefs. Beliefs, thoughts, and emotions are the substance of the mental and emotional intrapsychic infrastructure an individual's internal world. Psychological advantageousness answers these questions by assessing the MEII based on the quality of life. Based on the quality of life of the individual operating using the MEII. Put differently, individual thoughts, emotions, beliefs, schemas, memories, attitudes, dispositions, etc., are components of the MEII which can be assessed one by one to determine their respective impact on quality of life. If what an individual thinks, feels, and believes impacts their actions and outcomes, then it can be said that an individual's MEII impacts their reality or lived experience. Thus, the importance of the construction of the MEII is revealed. To wield the power of the MEII, one must first assess the baseline performance of the MEII by assessing the quality of life resulting from the current beliefs, then choose better, higher quality of life outcome yielding beliefs. For the purpose of this current research, quality of life refers to individuals' perceptions of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live and in relation to their goals, expectations, and concerns. Stowe's 2017 outline of the eight dimensions of wellness physical, intellectual, emotional, social, spiritual, vocational, financial, and environmental has been used in clinical settings and can be considered as a closer look into quality of life. Whose 2012 definition focuses on the individual's perception, and Stone identifies the perceived domains of an individual's life. Within each domain, there are innumerable measures that can be employed attesting to the breadth of quality of life. Assessments of depression, anxiety, heart rate variability, brain function, kidney function, cholesterol levels, job satisfaction, and social support, to name a few, are considerable candidates. Allostasis was coined by Sterling and Iyer, 1988, as an alternative to homeostasis, which they conceptualized as an internal constancy of an organism's internal states. They ultimately concluded that in order for an organism to maintain equilibrium, it must be able to dynamically moderate levels of neurobiological and psychoneuroimmunological hormones and processes such as cortisol, blood pressure, insulin, testosterone, estrogen, melatonin, endorphins, and cytokines, to name a few. Consideration of allostasis adds a more thorough look into how the MEI impacts quality of life. Allostasis was coined by Sterling and Iyer in 1988 as an alternative to homeostasis, which they conceptualized as an internal constancy of an organism's internal states. They ultimately concluded that in order for an organism to maintain equilibrium, it must be able to dynamically moderate levels of neurobiological and psychoneuroimmunological hormones and processes such as cortisol, blood pressure, insulin, testosterone, estrogen, melatonin, endorphins, and cytokines, to name a few. Thus, allostasis means stability through change. In lay terms, allostasis refers to an organism's agility and flexibility, being able to bend but not break in response to the demands on the organism. Sterling and I identified the brain and nervous system as the mechanisms by which allostasis takes place. They acknowledge contemporary scientific discoveries indicating that nerve cells interact with endocrine glands. For example, the pancreas, thyroid, kidneys, heart, spleen, thymus, lymph nodes, and blood vessels have all been found to be innervated. This supports the idea that the brain can communicate with and regulate all organs and systems within the body via these nerves. They described how the brain impacts organs at multiple levels by hormone secretion, which impacts peripheral organs and tissues, stimulates peripheral secretions of hormones from endocrine glands that in turn impact tissues, and hormone secretion from the pituitary gland that impact tissues and other distal endocrine glands. Vasopressin is released by the brain, leading to blood vessel constriction, decreased urine excretion from the kidneys, and increased blood release from the heart, resulting in adrenal release of aldosterone, pituitary release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, and increased blood pressure. These researchers described this process as cascadic and concluded that the brain has multiple ways to achieve the same effect. Increased blood pressure, although increased blood pressure through its manipulation of a variety of hormones and metabolites. The significance of these processes being described as cascadic is that there is evidence of pathways by which one physiological change precipitates the next. The paradox of this is that all of this change is executed to maintain equilibrium. The process of allostasis also shed light on the long-term impact of stress on the body through its precipitation of physiological cascades that lead to wear and tear on internal systems. The process of allostasis also shed light on the long-term impact of stress on the body through its precipitation of physiological cascades that lead to wear and tear on internal systems. Additionally, the neurophysiological pathways mentioned serve to connect psychological events to biological events, since the brain innervates the central and peripheral nervous systems. The idea that the construction of the MEII and its impact on the brain demonstrates a the construction of the MEII and its impact on the brain utilize these same pathways, demonstrating a syllogism between beliefs and quality of life indicators such as heart rate. McEwen, 1998, took the notion of allostasis a step further with his identification of allostatic load, which refers to the wear and tear that results from chronic allostatic activation. To put it simply, imagine you are a parent with a toddler who loves peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Excuse me. As the peanut butter runs out, you may begin to increase the jelly you put on a sandwich or vice versa. If you totally run out of peanut butter, you may substitute another nut butter such as cashew or almond. After a while, you may run out of plates and put the sandwich on a napkin, or run out of wheat bread and make the sandwich using flatbread. Ultimately, you are still making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but over time, you begin to compensate in small ways to get as close to that ideal goal as possible when resources become limited. Similarly, internal systems work to keep the body at some baseline level, but with compensation comes use and exhaustion of compensatory resources, such as running out of the plates or loosening of arterial walls after years of chronic stress and high blood pressure pushing against them. McEwen described allostatic load as the price of accommodation to stress. In other words, one can deal with stress but not unscathed. The psychosocial underpinnings of the allostatic load model encompass pathways by which social interactions, cognitive appraisal, and related stress get under the skin and lead to cascadic neurobiological and immunological sequelae. In other words, this section details how the soul employs a constructed MEII to yield quality of life outcomes reflected by the brain, body, and social life. McEwen, 1998, described how the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in response to stress is altered following habituation to the stressor. In those cases, cortisol production is no longer increased following exposure to that stressor. In other cases, individuals do not habituate to stress and instead continue increasing cortisol in response to the stressor. Ray, Ray Conan et al. 1996 linked insulin resistance to chronic stress, evidencing one allostatic consequence. Bjorn Torp found a link between psychosocial stress and deposition of fat in the abdomen of non-human primates. McEwen, 1998, described the natural turning on and off of the HPA axis with the arrival and removal of stresses, respectively. However, the allostatic load model offers an awareness that the HPA axis activation may not turn off when the stressor is removed, leading to a proliferation of stress hormones in the body that can result in disease. McEwen, 1998, identified the following situations as exemplars of allostatic load: heart attacks in response to blood pressure spikes following repeated stress exposures, Proliferation of stress hormones in the body, as mentioned previously, despite the removal of a stressor. Deterioration of the body's ability to turn off stress responses despite removal of stressors. And the compensatory biological checks and balances wherein, for example, cortisol secretion fails in response to a stressor and inflammatory cytokines increase instead. In rats, this has led to autoimmune and inflammatory responses. The neurobiological underpinnings of the allostatic load model overlap with the psychosocial evidence by the above description of stress and the HPA axis, which encapsulates brain and body reactions and therefore MEII and quality of life interactions. To delve more into this specific facet of the model, McEwen reported allostatic load on the brain looks like alterations of brain functioning. For example, the hippocampus is highly receptive for cortisol and is involved in various types of memory, such as verbal, contextual, temporal, spatial, and emotional. Hippocampal impairment can lead to disturbances of types of memory, leading to inaccuracies that can perpetuate the stress response due to the memory errors impacting threat perception. The hippocampus bears responsibility for inhibiting the HPA axis activation in response to stress. McEwen described the allostatic incitation of this outcome via the following cascades. One, acute stress increases cortisol levels. Cortisol secretion is received by receptors in the hippocampus. Cortisol suppresses hippocampal and temporal mechanisms, leading to memory disruption. And two, chronic or repeated stress lead to glucocorticoid and neurotransmitter release during and after stress response. These chemicals lead to These chemicals lead to dendritic atrophy in the hippocampus. If the stress is not alleviated, the hippocampal neurons can die. Thus, the allostatic load model describes how neurobiological responses to stress can yield wear and tear on the brain and internal organs. Put differently, this model offers clarity on how negative cognitive schemas that exacerbate threat perceptions, such as the world is dangerous or no one can be trusted, can lead to memory problems and disease. The psychoneuroimmunological underpinnings of the allostatic load model overlap with the psychosocial and neurobiological as described above. McEwen 1998 describes how activation of the HPA axis can yield acute immunological reactions and negatively impact cellular immunity. McEwen 1998 described how acute stress leads to redistribution of immune cells, for example, lymphocytes, into blood vessels, skin, lymph nodes, and bone marrow. This is adaptive and represents the body's preparation for acute stress. The immune system has a memory for these activations, so if it were to respond to the same stressor again, activation could be recreated. However, in cases of repeated stress, cellular immunity may be suppressed due to prolonged activation of the stress responses and redistribution of immune cells, yielding the unencumbered expression, the cold. However, in cases of repeated stress, cellular immunity may be suppressed due to prolonged activation of the stress responses and redistribution of immune cells, yielding the unencumbered expression of the common cold and other viruses in the body. Much like humans struggle to multitask, internal systems of the body do as well, down to the cellular level. Mounting a response to a stressful argument might lead to increased HPA axis activation, decreased memory of what was said in that argument, and an opening for viruses that lay dormant in the body to proliferate. Juster and Miss Sayek described the clinical implications of the allostatic load model, citing the connection between presentations of severe mental illness and allostatic load operation laws as presence of certain biomarkers such as stress hormones and pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines. Interestingly, one could infer from this that you can see how much stress someone is dealing with based on their biological humors. Stress comes in and it pours out. Stroop test. Harima described the Stroop test as a measure of executive functioning and screening for early Alzheimer's. Harima described the Stroop test as a measure of executive functioning and screener for early Alzheimer's. Executive functioning refers to an individual's planning, reasoning, decision making, inhibition, emotional control, working memory, and self monitoring abilities. The impairment of these functions, as Harima describes, can indicate early signs of cognitive impairment leading to dementia, such as Alzheimer's. Dominguez Cardoza et al. 2022 identified the Stroop test as a diagnostic tool as well, but for minimal hepatic encephalopathy in Mexican patients with cirrhosis. Clinch et al. Described the Stroop test as a measure of attention and conflict resolution, as well as a diagnostic for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Huntington's diseases. They created an analog version of the Stroop test for rodents to identify specific brain areas involved in performance of the task. They found that the Stroop test elicits activation of the prefrontal, hippocampal, and retrosplenial cortex regions of the rodent brain. They also found that performance on the Stroop analog was associated with reduced dorsomedial striatum activation. Based on these findings, the Stroop test is supported as a measure of neuropsychological functioning. Gretsch et al. 2019 reported a positive relationship between core executive function and increased overall quality of life, specifically for participants endorsing high levels of religious coping, as well as those endorsing high denial coping. Gretsch et al. 2019 reported a positive relationship between core executive function and increased overall quality of life, specifically for participants endorsing high levels of religious coping, as well as those endorsing high denial coping. They also reported that total executive functioning was related to better mental health and overall quality of life. Organic Organic also used the Stroop task as a measure of executive functioning and found that inhibitor control One aspect of executive functioning was associated with higher cardiorespiratory fitness. Since the Stroop test is a measure of executive functioning and increased executive functioning is associated with increased quality of life, the study supports the use of Stroop test as a quality of life measure and predictor. Further studies are needed to test the reliability of these findings. The problem this research is answering is how to improve quality of life. Up until now, beliefs in other aspects of individuals' MEIs have been above reproach. People resort to identifying the subjectivity of value judgments of the Gestalt MEI and its components and typically don't describe beliefs in terms of better or worse. This is problematic because in this information age, there is so much information available to people that anyone can believe anything and insulate themselves in like minded circles. This can be helpful for obvious reasons, but also harmful if people develop a sense of complacency. In keeping with the aforementioned example, using Christianhood. If Christians become complacent in their subscription to a paradigm that, on average, yielded increased grief severity, their quality of life may stagnate at an undesirable level. By producing this research, individuals gain the ability to analyze their MEIs and edify themselves to achieve improved quality of life. In such a zeitgeist, with an abundance of information at one's fingertips, how does one know? How does one decide what to believe? How does one decide what is true and what is false? How does one decide how to configure their MEII to yield the quality of life they desire? The current research answers these questions by suggesting identifying the psychological advantageousness of the MEII will provide a new metric for information to be judged. How does this information fit within one's MEII and serve one's quality of life? Based on that, individuals can edify their MEII until they get their desired outcomes. This research will answer the following question: which belief is better? God exists or God does not exist? Better is operationalized by heart rate variability, performance on the Stroop test, and self-reported quality of life ratings on the DAF-Q. Hypothesis. The belief that God exists is associated with higher heart rate variability, lower scores on the Stroop test, and higher scores on the DAF-Q. Research phases. Okay. This research will involve a series of phases to achieve the purpose of elucidating psychological advantageousness, the relationship between the MEII and its components, and quality of life outcomes. Phase 1. Phase 1 involves probing the concurrent and discriminant validity of findings from the dispositional affective frequency questionnaire. The DAF-Q revolutionizes the literature by inquiring about participants' The DAF-Q revolutionizes the literature by inquiring about participants' beliefs as demographic variables. By using this data demographically, the sample can be stratified into believer versus non-believer groups on a variety of beliefs. The DAF-Q includes a list of dispositional affective adjectives and requires participants to rate the typicality of them feeling those adjectives using a Likert scale ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. In phase 1, the DAF-Q is administered alongside the PHQ-4, which is a brief screening for depression and anxiety. and the psychological well-being scale, which is an already established quality of life measure. The expectation is that higher scores on the DAFQ negatively correlate with scores on the PHQ-4 and positively correlate with scores on the psychological well-being scale. From these results, the research team will identify average outcomes for each belief group. For example, if the sample is divided between God exists and God does not exist groups, then averages for each group can be calculated and compared between groups using the t-test. Using this approach, belief groups can be organized based on their quality of life yields. A listing of the highest quality of life yielding beliefs can be disseminated to the public and considered for clinical use. In sum, phase one uses the DAFQ to operationalize both the MEII and quality of life. Hence, the DAFQ is tested as a standalone measure of PA. PHQ-4 and psychological well-being scale are additional quality of life measures. Additionally, phase one will inform researchers about the variance in beliefs within the sample, which will be used for phase two. Phase two. During phase two, an identified belief will be selected due to its ability to split the sample into competitive halves. Participants will be administered a number of neuropsychological. Participants will be administered Participants will be administered at least one neuropsychological test, street test, trailmaker test, etc. Then, like in phase one, mean group performance can be calculated and compared between groups. God exists group versus God does not exist group. Participants will be administered the DAFQ, a measure of heart rate variability, and at least one neuropsychological test. Then, like in phase one, mean group performance can be calculated and compared between groups. God exists group versus God does not exist group. This will inform researchers about which beliefs are most correlated with higher performance on psychological, psychophysiological, and to circumvent the issue of ecological validity in these tests, group members will also take. Thus, in phase two, the identified belief used to stratify the sample will operationalize the MEII and neuropsychological test outcomes will operation neuropsycho. operationalize quality of life outcomes. Phase 3 will occur in a postdoctoral program that allows researchers to prescribe beliefs in clinical trials to see if the high-yielding beliefs that have been identified in phases 1 and 2 can be high-yielding for other people. This will involve belief training interventions that support individuals in edifying their beliefs. We might also involve use of neuroimaging techniques first. As mentioned above, this research draws on cognitive behavioral therapy literature as well as the health belief model. Additionally, neurovisceral integration, additionally, uh, Additionally, the neurovisceral integration hypothesis states that affective, autonomic, and attentional processes share neural circuitry as well as the heart as an end organ. This hypothesis connects heart rate and heart rate variability with the central autonomic network and suggests they are influenced by individuals' affective states such as worry and attentional dispositions such as persistent anxiety, resulting in increased attention to potential or imagined threats and decreased inattention to these stimuli, resulting in a positive feedback loop. Worry begets worry as anxious individuals fall into confirmation bias that perpetuates anxious distress, thus maladaptive cognitive schemas or other components of the MEII, such as the belief that God exists, for example, may serve mechanistically to influence their effective autonomic and intentional resources, thereby impacting their quality of life outcomes. Remediation of this issue might be achieved through substitution of the schema for something more psychologically advantageous. Self regulation and goal directed behavior was suggested to be impaired in individuals with decreased heart rate variability and anxiety disorder, such as generalized anxiety disorder, due to individuals' inability to disinhibit heart rate as a proxy for vagal tone. The vagus nerve is activated parasympathetically to inhibit the heart's chronotropic and dromotropic qualities. When the vagus nerve is not able to do that, when the vagus nerve is not able to do that, attentional shifting may be lost, leading to someone being stuck in worrying, and the heart rate may become constricted within a particular range, resulting in lower variability. Goal directed behavior from this lens becomes difficult to determine as individuals, difficult to achieve. Goal directed becomes difficult to perform as individuals seem to fall into positive feedback loops that maintain goals based on their attention but impair their ability to set new or more meaningful goals, such that an anxious person may have a goal of securing their safety in an already safe environment, leading to perseveration on a goal that is already completed and impaired quality of life potentially. And subsequent impaired quality of life. Thayer and Lane, 2000, defined negative feedback circuits as inhibitory processes necessary for interrupting biological processes. In lay terms, the feedback provided from an output results in changing the input. Individuals can learn from their mistakes. And individuals whose mechanism for this action is impaired, they may develop positive feedback loops wherein they cannot learn from their mistakes, and instead the mistakes beget more. Thayer and Lane conceptualized anxious distress as a byproduct of this process where individuals cannot stop themselves from perceiving non-threatening stimuli as threatening, i.e. making the same mistake, metaphorically speaking. Thayer and Lane mentioned this idea of pathological affective states and dispositions, which seems to express some notion of configurations or constellations of cognitive, some notion of configurations of cognitive, affective, behavioral, and physiological variables. Thus, self regulation, and more specifically, attention and emotion regulation, is impacted by the nature and rigidity of the dispositions individuals develop. Dispositions are one aspect of the for individuals steadfast in their attentional preference for racial epithets, they may create a positive feedback loop maintained via confirmation bias, resulting in them becoming increasingly physiological aroused or potentially eventually desensitized to racism in America. Potentially eventually. Or this physiological arousal could look like impeded heart rate variability, such that by staying in a mode of acute awareness of racial injustice, individuals may lock their heart in the commensurate range associated with their emotional reactions to the racist stimuli. In this example, the neurovisceral integration hypothesis suggests that the physiological reaction to the stimulus and the attentional preference for the stimulus go hand in hand, And self-regulation involves selecting or reselecting intentional preferences to facilitate physiological change. Additionally, goal-directed behavior follows from attention preferences because the goals are set within the attention of the goal setter. And by changing what one conceives as a worthwhile endeavor, they can shift their attention and the range of their heart. Thayer and Lane, 2000, elaborated on the conceptualization of emotion as a function of arousal and valence, credited with influencing the brain's reward system, the conditioning of individuals, and their goal directed behavior. They conceptualize an emotional state space, which refers to the calibration of an individual's behavior, emotion, associations into distinct profiles. They describe the internal and external conditions influencing an emotional state as parameters, the behavioral and emotional responses as attractors, and the relationship between these as the emotional state space referenced above. These state spaces have measurable physiological sequelae, heart rate, and vagal tone. Mastermind. Masterman and Cummings describe neurocircuitry involved in the operation of the emotional state space. They found relationships between glutamatergic and GABAergic projections between frontal and subcortical regions. Specific regions identified pathways involving specific regions. Specific regions house pathways involving the frontal cortex, striatum, caudate nucleus, putamen, thalamus, globus pallidus, and substantia nigra. Their work supports the idea of cortical, subcortical, and cognitive cardiac interactions, facilitating the emotional state space. In short, these researchers revealed the integration aspect of the neurovisceral integration hypothesis by detailing how attentional, autonomic, and affective processing work. The neurovisceral integration hypothesis sets the stage for the current research to correlate beliefs with heart rate variability, executive functioning, and self-reported quality of life. The significance of this study is that it assists in raising the collective consciousness and empowering individuals to improve their quality of life. In the process of doing this, the study adds the following advancements to the literature. The study reconceptualizes beliefs as a type of demographic indicator. This reconceptualization can alter how future studies are conducted as well as how historical data is analyzed. By By stratifying a sample based on endorsement of beliefs, researchers can learn more about the impact of said beliefs and view sampling in a novel way. If this can be done with beliefs, other aspects of the MEI can also serve as demographic variables. For example, samples can be stratified based on ontological paradigms of the individual's drives, sources of motivation for individuals, and moods, to name a few. This study adds psychological advantageousness and mental and emotional intrapsychic infrastructure to the lexicon. This to the lexicon. This study helps revitalize inquiry into quality of life and assists in building the positive psychology literature. This study demonstrates an interdisciplinary approach that will encourage future researchers to do the same. Drawing from seemingly unrelated disciplines helps produce more interesting and far reaching conceptual frameworks. For example, this current research bridges computer science, therapy, gaming, psychophysiology, social psychology, and neuropsychology. This study is generative. It inspires more questions about the MEI, and quality of life and the relationships between them. Additionally, these constructs are defined broadly enough to allow for interchangeable operationalizations. For example, future studies of the MEI might focus on moods rather than beliefs. Or even if future studies focus on beliefs, they may specify different beliefs or belief clusters. Quality of life, too, can be assessed across the eight dimensions of wellness, each dimension having innumerable measures that can be used. This study highlights the role of calibration in scientific inquiry, such that even the most seemingly trivial outcomes, how many teeth someone has, how many pets someone has, can be correlated with their quality of life and MEI. Can be correlated. This also brings into question what can and cannot be considered an indicator of quality of life. This study will inform people on which beliefs are better and assist them in edifying their MEIs. By providing statistics for the belief options, individuals can make informed decisions about which beliefs to adopt. And another thing, um, one of my more recent realizations related to this research, I found playing the game of chess. And if you haven't played chess, this may not make as much sense to you. But basically, I guess the same applies to checkers. Basically, when you start a chess game, you already have all the pieces. Basically, you have all the pieces you can get. Even though you could like change a pawn into a queen, you won't get like more pieces out of the game. You only get less pieces. I mean, in terms of like quantity. So I look at the game of chess as a hmm, representation of what happens, or what from the research, what I'm learning happens with the body when you start a chess game. You basically reorganize your pieces because they all start lined up in like two rows, and then you basically rearrange them in a way to protect yourself and capture the opponent's king. And that in the process of me playing chess, I'm like, this looks like what I just talked about with the allostasis, because your body has to rearrange itself to basically respond to whatever's in front of you. For example, if I see my opponent, like they first move is they do knight to. I don't play chess that much to like know all the like B4 or C7. I don't have it down like that, but say they pull a knight out first, like my go-to response is to push my pawn. Why? Because I know if the knight were to make another move, that pawn blocks it from those like two potential spaces. So it's like a dance, almost like a give and take. And in a similar way, like say somebody sneeze near you, like your immune system has to like first your immune system was chilling, everything was good. Then all of a sudden, like on Osmosis Jones, you got this foreign agent, like this germ, trying to invade your body. So now instead of your body just having like the two rows, everybody chilling, now you see like, oh, they done pulled the night out. So now your body has to mount an immunological response. So your body pushed the pawn forward. And that by itself is not a problem. The problem comes in, or I guess disease comes in when that happens like for a long period of time. Or like say you push the pawn, right? Because this is the thing, like you can't do everything all at once. So if you push your pawn to block the knight, that pawn is can't go back to the spot it was just at. So like it made a decision, right? And when you make a decision, you choose one thing, but you reject everything else. Because that same pawn, with pawns, you can advance one or two spaces um, on a first move. If somebody bring out their knight, you're only going to advance your pawn. I feel like I need to look at a chessboard to confirm, but I'm pretty sure you're only going to advance your pawn one space, which takes away the possibility that you could have went two spaces, and you'll never get that chance back. And in a similar way, like your body is fighting, this germ. In a sense, it can return to some equilibrium that it had prior to that, but not all at the same time. So when that stressor that your immune system's fighting is like long term, like you dealing with this stressor or you dealing with this germ for weeks, months, years, like maybe the stressor is poverty, like dealing with poverty year after year after year, or like the hustling grind of I gotta work, I gotta get money, I gotta do the rat race year after year after year. It's like, yeah, that night been there for a long time, and your pawn been there for a long time, and now as the person watching the night, like, because you're sitting there, like when you play chess, you're sitting there watching these pieces, right? So after a while, you might get bored, you might get tired, you're like, oh man, how long I gotta sit here? Or you might zone off, start doing something else. Like this game taking too long. Like because after you push your pawn up, you gotta wait for the other person to move. So in a similar way, I think that's really what allostasis is saying. Like your body can mount a response. Like you could put your pawn out there, but over time, like things get tired. The pawn gets tired. You get tired watching it sit there. The other pieces like, all right, what are we doing? Things like that. So that was my most recent connection. Um, and I think that's another reason why this research is significant because I'm able to see how it connects to things that you would probably think are totally irrelevant. Like you probably would think chess is totally irrelevant to neuropsychology, but actually it's not. And one of the challenging parts about writing is that is the challenge that we hear about historically. Whenever somebody does something innovative, like innovation is not typically met with open arms. From what I've been told, innovation usually comes alongside like a social or cultural revolution that like kind of sets the stage for something innovative to happen. Prior to that, people not going for it, like they'll reject whatever's innovative or new. And so that is part of the challenge of writing is that you may want to write whatever, you could write whatever you think, whatever you want to write. But at the same time, if you're trying to get it published or get it in certain spaces and it's innovative, it might be a bit of a fight or some resistance to it. But I mean, I think knowing that helps me. I feel like that's par for the course. But yeah, that's one of the challenges because then you got to reconcile. Like, do you want like not for nothing? Tomorrow's not promised today, right? So you got to reconcile. Do you want to write this authentically, like the way it is in your mind? Write it just like that. No edits, no nothing, no watered down, nothing. Just straight, just this what it is, and then deal with the potential rejection, or do you like conform it or water it down or change it, like edit it to be more palatable to your current audience? Like, I guess everybody makes their own choice, like how much they want to edit it. But like 100 years from now, when we're all not here, like, would you be proud that yeah, you got it off in your lifetime, but like you ain't really say what you wanted to say. Like what you really wanted to say still ain't get said. And yeah, you got, whatever accolades or approval from the people that were there at the time. But like 100 years from now, that's gonna be your legacy. And then your legacy would be inauthentic because people won't actually really know you. They only know the watered down version of you that was allowed to be published. So that is something I've been thinking about. Like you can say what you want to say, but then like the longevity of it, like if you say it how you really want to say it, and it don't get like people don't like bite onto it or it doesn't get preserved, then it still won't be like there for future generations. But then if you just say what people tell you to say and they preserve it for generations, that's not even your thoughts. You just parroting something somebody else told you to say. So, and I noticed that with, I guess through entrepreneurship, I gave you a good example. Let's say you're a singer and you want to go on like, what's that singing show used to come out? American Idol. You want to go on American Idol, right? You want to go up there, you want to sing like whatever song, you just want to like show your talent. And like American Idol is gonna be archived somewhere. So 100 years from now, somebody might be able to watch an episode or see you sing. But I guess there's always that give and take because for you to be on a show, not I'm I haven't been offered to be on a show, but I have been in like different productions. Usually when you read the contract, it'll say something like you give us you give us like this limitless rights to your likeness, your image. Like we could use this video for whatever we want. You forfeit all rights to it. And it's like, damn, for me to be on a stage to reach millions, because you're on their show, and their show is broadcast to millions. For you to get that, what you're giving up is your ownership of what you're doing. So you could go up there and do your best job. You're the best person on American Idol. You don't own nothing you just did. Like you can't eat off the fruit that you're bearing because the the location, and that's frustrating and kind of reminds me like slavery. Like damn, like say you was a good farmer, but this is like somebody's plantation. Even if you farm, like say you grow the best, I don't want to be stereotypical. I was gonna say watermelons. Say you grow the best like apple trees. You got the best apple trees in the South. The owner of the land is gonna be like, that's my dirt. That's my rain. That's my wind. Like everything that happened there, I own. So yeah, you did your part, but like we get the lion's share. And I think it's the same thing with research because if you do have a totally novel idea and people don't, the, like the publisher or whoever it is that you're trying to put your like get a seat at their table with, if they ain't trying to hear it, like you kind of got to give up something. Not saying like a Diddy party, like you ain't got to give up no cheeks, but you might have to give up some cheeks to get, you feel me, to get what you want to get. Like if Diddy is like, yeah, you gonna get $1 million and you'll get to sing in front of millionaires, like he'll make you a star. I mean, you could take that opportunity to be a star, but is it really you? Because then look at what you gave up, like your integrity, your dignity, how you really wanted to show up. By then, you kind of just parroting. And I think that's what people mean when they say like people sell their souls. Because you could definitely sell your agency, you could sell your decision making. For example, like I think people might take it for granted, and I just realized this because I was having a conversation with somebody recently. But people might take for granted the fact that you pick your own clothes out. But imagine if you like a celebrity and you got a stylist and you got people that they want to present a particular like polished image that is drafted up by a team of writers and a team of um, like public analysts. Like you got a team of marketers basically. That's like, yeah, if we want your products to sell, we need you to show up this particular way. You might personally not care about nothing they're talking about. But if you sign that contract and you want to be on this stage and you want to be in this system and get all the fame and the accolades and all that, you might give up the freedom to pick your outfits out. Now, every time you go out in the pictures, you wearing what they told you to wear. You might not even like the clothes. Then, when you dead and gone, and people look up pictures of you from back in the day, they can be like, "Damn, I ain't like how you dressed. Whole time, you ain't like how you dressed neither." And you never say nothing about it because you was getting paid to dress like that. So it's like, what do you really want? And I think that's kind of comes back to I think it was a video saying how indigenous peoples got finessed to get money and give up. Like we already was wealthy from jump because you do all this. You show up to an indigenous land with people not necessarily like working to live. You know, people do what they do, but they're not necessarily like chasing material things or whatever. And you give them, put them in a situation where they start working and they embrace capitalism and all that. And one of the pinnacles of like wealth or like knowing that you made it is the fact that you have the freedom to relax, which is where they started from anyway. People was already relaxing before this whole charade. So then you just convince people to work so you could relax. So it's just it's like a big finesse, you know. It's one big finesse because you already got it. And then when people, I think businesses benefit when you got low self esteem because you won't know that you got it or you won't act like you got it. Like you could be great, but would you know that you was great if nobody told you? And if you need somebody to tell you, Diddy might want some cheeks just for you to get validation because you ain't getting nothing else. It's a 360 deal. You're not getting no money from it. All you're getting is validation. You get to be in certain social circles. You get like, you know, a pat on the back or whatever it is. But is it really worth it? I guess it depends what's valuable to you. Hence why we are here um, producing these lives, talking about research, because I don't know. I'm still figuring out how much to edit, you know, what to edit, and staying true to what I actually want to say. So I guess we will see what happens. But if anyone has any feedback, definitely leave a comment or something.